Hi, this is Chris at Clever Unicorn Games and the Unicorn Collective, back with another one of our interviews. Today I have Tony Vasinda with us. How are you doing today, Tony?
How's it going, Chris?
Yeah, pretty good. Weather's not the best over here. I'm not sure what it's. Well, where is Philadelphia in the US? Is that more down towards the hot area, or is
It's
that?
in a really weird place. Yeah, it's in the north, for sure. Is what a lot of people would classify as the northeastern part of America, but I think the Mid-Atlantic is actually what a lot of people call the region that it's a part of. So Philly, Baltimore, a couple other places. It's in the northeast corner, but we're basically in the armpit, the northeast corner of America.
But that means your weather's probably very similar to ours, so it's a bit overcast and a bit drizzly today.
Yesterday, we actually had a huge downpour, which was awesome. We just moved here from Seattle, so we're used to drizzle. But I grew up in Texas, and my wife grew up in Pittsburgh, so we love like huge rainstorms, and we didn't get them in Seattle. And so we sat on the porch for like an hour yesterday and just watched the rain.
And Seattle's on the opposite coast, isn't it?
It was a 2-week drive across the across the country with our 4 teenage kids to get from Seattle to Philly about 8 months ago.
So let's get started. What is it that you like to do with your time when you're not designing games or doing any of your other work endeavors? What is it you like to do with your spare time, so shall we say?
So if it's not designing games or playing games, that's a lot of the other thing that I do in my free time. I read a lot. So I usually have about 5 books going at the same time, and there'll be a mix of creativity books, theology books. I usually have 2 or 3 lit RPG books, which are really weird subclassification of science fiction, and a couple other books. And then a lot of my time is also now spent cooking, baking, doing other stuff for our family, our household, and our neighborhood.
You sound like a busy man that likes to keep himself active.
Yeah, I whether or not I want to keep myself active, and there's certainly plenty of downtime. I used to have 5 jobs basically, and now I have jobs, and so it's been nice to step back and have free time to just be able to do things. So I do like to keep myself.
With board games, what would you say is your favorite board game?
With tabletop games, I tend towards role playing and storytelling games. So there's a small independent storytelling game called The Quiet Year, where you're playing as survivors of some sort of apocalyptic event that's left you with a small colony of survivors, and you start by creating the basics of a map, and then over the course of the game, every round, you're going through a year of survival in this, and you're doing it a week at a time. And you're doing different activities, but you're always noting on the map the different activities are, how they impact the landscape of the community. And you control the group of, it could be 8 to 30 to start, and maybe 100 at the end, survivors. And then at the end of that, there's this other event that happens that kind of is the game, and we kind of do post narration themes. But it's probably one of my favorite because I love artifaction in games. I love when you actually make things. But for tabletop games, Smash Up is actually another one of my favorites that I don't feel like I get to hit the table often enough. I love the theming of it. And then, oh man, I always call it Resistance, which I also love. But Revolution by Steve Jackson Games is one of my favorite blind bidding and bluffing games that is out there. And it's absolutely phenomenal game.
Yeah, Resistance is probably my least favorite game ever made. But on the flip side of that, I've got Smash Up with the Legendary Box and all the expansions. Although again, that's one you're right. I haven't played it in a long time, but I've got it sat on my shelf there with it. And it is a lot of fun, Smash Up. But yeah, Resistance. I think it's more Resistance is when you have to lie to your friends. I'm not a big fan of games where you have to lie to your friends. That's just my preference. I know it's a very popular game, but for me, it just, I don't feel great playing it.
The thing I love about Smash Up is the theming on each deck feels really solid. Like it's a good introduction. It's a good teaching game for people who have never played deck builders before, but the theming on it. But yeah, Resistance, and Coup and a lot of the other hidden role games, I enjoy a whole lot. I tend to play them pretty straight. I tend to not lie unless it's absolutely implicit for the nature of the game. I just tend to play very stone-faced, which keeps you playing consistently the entire time and makes it so that nobody ever knows you're bluffing.
And there you go. You mentioned Coup, and Coup's one I actually don't mind. I quite enjoyed Coup, and that's the difference. I think the difference is, Resistance is more. it's hard to do anything without trying to lie with resistance. You know, you have to do a little bit. But with coup, I have won many a game just by telling the truth the whole time, and people don't believe that you're telling the truth, and then it works out. Yeah, coup I quite enjoy. Yeah, yeah, good choices. What kind of games or game was there a game in particular that inspired you to start creating games yourself?
I loved games all growing up. The Living Labyrinth is a game that I remember playing a lot as a child. A lot of my love for gameplay came through actually creating gamified experiences for groups of teenagers and adults that I worked with. I did a lot of community development, a lot of team building, other things like that, and the ability to take experience and craft it as a game with an objective, with rules, and inviting people to navigate through it as a process for self-discovery, not just like, hey, let's do another trust fall, but how do you create kind of larger gamified experiences was actually one of the things that really got me into actual design. When I was growing up, it was a lot of just the standard classic board games, a lot of Risk, a lot of kind of smaller sub niche ones. I never liked high luck games. That was never one of my really kind of go-to points. And I always wanted to get more into it. The first game I ever saved up all of my money to buy, and I still have the board for it upstairs, is a 3-player chess and checkers variant that I actually don't even know that I really knew how to play chess when I bought it. I was really just enamored with the idea of somebody taking a classic game and twisting it a little bit. And so I bought it at the local game store, and it was $32, and I had to go back out and like dig through my dad's like in section of his car because I hadn't brought enough money for the tax, and he wasn't going to help. He was like, if you can find enough money in my car, you can buy it. And so I was like devastatingly through it. But yeah, those pro social experiences were a huge part of it. And then, like I said, my interest was pretty early on, even though it was a lot of just classic games for the most part.
When coming up with a game, where is it that you start first? So you've got the idea in your head. Where do you go from that idea? What is the first thing you will do?
I will usually go from an initial idea, which usually is like somebody will say something, experience something, and it usually starts with like not even, hey, this would be a good game. This sounds like a lot of fun, or this is a really fun idea. Lots of times those will evolve into a game. Usually the next step is I will sit on it for between 15 minutes to 3 months and just kind of mull it over in my head and think about it from time to time. I'll take just a first crack at writing a rule book. I usually won't even start with mechanics. I'll start with writing down, here are the 5 or 6 core things that I know I want to be rules for this game that kind of keep the fun on the rails. But after that, I'll actually move into actual like prototyping different elements, other things like that. But drafting the rule book is actually kind of step number 1 for me, which I feel like a lot of people, it's the last thing they come back to. Lots of people are really bad at writing stuff down, and so am I. But I'm always geared towards, hey, what are the things, if we're going to try to have this experience of fun, what are the rules that keep that fun on the rails, and how do we actually make sure those things are essential? And that'll get tweaked a whole lot. But I find it's way easier to come back and finish the rule book at the very end if I've started with the rule book at the very beginning.
Yeah, that's something I think a lot of designers wish they'd start with, because the rule book's probably the hardest thing to put together when it comes to the game. I mean, there's lots of parts in it that are, little things like cards and tokens and things like that. They're quite simple. When it comes to actually making a rule book that's decipherable, not only by other people but by yourself, that's
I,
that's a very hard part of making a game.
and like one of my games, the rule book is it's the size of a card, and it's like 8 pieces of paper, like in an accordion style. The other one is an RPG, so it's 30 pages of rules. So
Yeah, big difference.
the variation in how much that may or may not be can be a lot. But even with the RPG, the reality is when I sat down to originally write the rules, it was only pages. It was the core initial elements of, here's how I want this game to be played. Here's what I think is fun about that. So I think that ties into the theme. And then from there, it's just expanded out to being what it is now.
You've previously taken a game all the way from your head to market, and it's about to go out to people. Is there anything during that time, so a barrier or a hurdle that you've hit and you've thought, ooh, I don't know how I'm going to approach this, and then how did you overcome that barrier?
I'm actually in the middle of that right now. I don't know that I don't know the answer to how we're going to overcome it, but logistics, I think, are the most intimidating thing making a game. I know very few designers who are like, I got into making games because I want to ship things all over the world and deal with the headache is the international postage system, VAT prices, taxes, international shipping rates, shipping fluctuations, which packages to use, and turning my living room into a major shipping enterprise. That to me is one of the most difficult things about the entire process. I'm lucky. I run an e-commerce company. I make beard balm for a living, and the company we use for fulfillment is actually going to be handling a lot of it. But even as I look at digital distribution, how I look at how we get the game out there, and what platforms we put it on, how I get download keys to people, making sure all their emails are right. And I only have about 200 backers, so I'm not looking at the people. That's still a big task for me. It's something that's totally out of my wheelhouse and is really intimidating. And again, not why any of us sit down and want to design games. So I think for me, it's always about partnering with the right people, which is why I have a fulfillment company in the first place. I used to ship everything from home. I know I'm not good at it, and that's why we moved to having a partner that does all that for us. So my wife's already on board to help me kind of get everything set up. Though we've done a lot of the research into Itch and Drive Through RPG and a lot of the other websites to figure out how we house things properly, how we get things to people, how we get feedback, and what works the easiest with Kickstarter systems. But that's been the biggest obstacle so far. There's lots of community support out there for it. And the hard thing is kind of sorting through, do I want to do this myself? Do I want to go with a service? All those different pieces. And I think people just need to pick what's right for them. If this is something that you're a highly detail-oriented person who love, tracking down those details, making sure that they're doing it. I actually think there is a lot of value having spent 2 years, mailing a whole bunch of products out of my house. There is a very human connection that comes through somebody sending in the mail that you don't get using a service. Like a lot of people, I think, thrive on not just the logistic aspect, but the really kind of ritual of putting something together, writing a note, dropping it into the mail and sending it to somebody. I just got some stuff from the guys at Orange Nebula, and it came with a little personal note. It was obviously packed with a lot of care. I can't wait to. They've got a board game called Unsettled coming out that I can't wait to get. It's exactly my jam. It's this sandbox exploration game that's absolutely phenomenal. They just sent me like all my other stuff. Like a hat and some other things from the campaign that I'd put on as add-ons. The packaging that went into it was obviously very intentional, very careful, and felt very human. There's like a moment of connection that you have when you receive something in the mail, or that when you send something, that when you do it by hand actually is really satisfying. So I think if you go with a fulfillment company, that's great. Like that's what we're doing for our project, just to make sure that things are done as easily as possible. But there's a lot of value in sitting down if you've never had the experience before and just kind of doing it yourself to get that human connection.
Yeah, we got the best of both worlds. We had only for Europe, we only had like 200 or 300 backers, so we did that ourselves and we just posted it out. But then America was, I think, 600 or 700, so we let
Yeah.
Quartermaster Games deal with that and just posted them off to them because that would have been too much. But yeah, even those 200 or 300 that we did took us a few days to get all those done and sent out. But then we only had small games, so it was kind of easy. They were in like a little packet, so we could, it's a tuck box, so you can just send it out in a packet. I can't imagine somebody having 200 big box games sent to them and then having to ship them out to people.
Even like where you put them in your house. Like this is something that people don't think about. Like if you order 1,000 copies of your game, you have to put them somewhere, right? Like you have to put them in a physical place. So you have to rent a place and put them there, which means a lot of back and forth. I have a huge basement down here. I mean, I would have space. Luckily, when you're talking about ordering, 500 copies of a role playing game, especially for a zine length game like ours is, you're not talking about a ton of space that you're going to need to be able to store that. But paper actually takes up a whole lot more space than people think it does, and that even that is bigger than you think it will pretty quickly.
Have you ever played a game that for some reason you didn't like? And you don't have to name the game, but what was the mechanic or the theme or what was it that put you off that game?
Yeah, I've never stopped playing a game in the middle of it because I've disliked it so much, except for one time, and it was a mix of don't know that it was a good game, but I also don't know because the rules were so poorly written. Part of the issue was it was a translated rule set, and I don't know that the person who did the translation um, did due diligence to the game. And all I remember it was like souls escaping from hell. So it was like an Inferno, like Dante's Inferno style game, which there are a number of. So I don't know which one it was. And if you want to track it down and tell me, anybody out there, feel free to. But the rulebook was just really bad, and we just could not make it through the game because nothing about the way we were playing it based on the rules felt like the way the game should go. It felt like there were essential pieces that were missing or misdone that just wouldn't let us get through it. Other than that, I really tend to shy away from games where the amount of time I'm going to take to set up the game immediately makes it not fun to play. And that doesn't mean that setup can't be an important part, but I like setup as part of play, or I like light setup, or I like, hey, like this is going to take an hour to set up, sure, but we are going to be able to play this game for 2 or 3 weeks. There are other games that you take a couple of days to set up and a couple of days to play, and that's just not something I'm super into.
Why is it that you make games?
It's a big part of how I view most of reality, I think. Like, I am the kind of person who, when I get hired at a place, I am the kind of person who I'll read the employee handbook. I will take in all the information about what the company is, and my brain will automatically start looking for holes, for exploits. And I say that it's not always in a negative way, but the example that always comes up is like usually within working at a place for a week or two, like I know how I would rob that place if I was going to. Not that I ever plan on robbing that place, but my brain will automatically start to just take in a lot of that information. I also tend to look at it for, okay, look, if I'm looking at how I advance through whatever this company defines as success, I want to create a clear mental picture for how I do that. And so a lot of the way that I approach social interactions, the rules of life, for lack of a better stance, are through the lens of games. And I don't know what it is about me that causes that to be the case, but I can remember from a young age that was oftentimes the way that I would approach things. Most of my time as a childhood was spent creating fake games with my friends in the giant wooded area that we lived. Every day was, if not a new game, a game of some sort that would we played across the entire neighborhood. So I think for me, a lot of kind of ludology was kind of just built into me from a very young age, and I just never saw a reason that adults get rid of that. For me, everything seems like it's based on a series of rules with set goals and objectives for the most part. I think that relationships should be viewed outside of that. I don't think anybody should approach relationships as a game. But other than that, for me, pretty much everything comes into a gamified idea when I do it. And so I think this is just kind of a natural extension of that, is starting to put your own creative spin on something that you naturally think about all the time.
How has the state of the world at present affected the way that you're designing and making games and playing games as well? How has it affected your life in general?
It's interesting. People care about board games and tabletop games now more than they did because they're looking for something to do that is in their household. Also, games have become a huge way that people connect online now, especially role-playing games, through things like Discord, through online play sessions, Roll20, other things like that, where people will stop and do that. So I have a lot of friends who all of a sudden haven't been able to play in years, who all of a sudden have free time and who are wanting to play games online to reconnect, to reach out. And so there is kind of a way in which this is a revolution of relationships, that people are kind of returning back to, hey, like I'm not as busy right now, or maybe it's just that relationships seem more important right now. I want to reconnect with people over something that I love. And so I have introduced 3 or 4 new people in the last month to role-playing games. We've been doing a couple online sessions. I have some friends who have had the time now to do their own development on their own projects that I've been helping play test. So, I mean, for me, a lot of it's been watching people dive back into games. There are a lot of people also who are all of a sudden doing like cash grab games around the realities of our world right now, which to me seems really frustrating. But I think this is a moment where we need to take a lot of things in, but I also think the type of escapism or the type of connections that we're building with people, we're going to be way more intentional about right now. And I think games have become a huge way to do that.
Yeah, I've seen a few of those games trying to grab what's going on, and yeah, I've
COVID-19, the game.
yeah, there's a few of them,
Yeah. And I
and
just, I don't know who, I don't know why people think it's a good idea.
yeah,
Right?
me
Like
neither.
even,
Somebody actually put it up in one of the Facebook groups. Is this a? They posted their thing about it and said, "Is this bad taste?" And I said yes. I just said yes. There's a lot of people that said, "Well, if you can get money from it," but I just said clearly said yes. I wouldn't do it. I would not release anything like that.
the lifespan of a game, not even just like, is it still going to be relevant? But so, okay, you funded. Obviously, this game was probably not in the works. Even if you're cloning someone else's game and going with something quick to turn around printing, the reality is by the time the game hits people, it's going to be 6 months to a year plus. Even if you fund right now, yeah, it was just a cash grab. They're going to get it and they're going to be like, oh, I remember this really horrible time period. I don't know that I want to play the game version of this.
You're right, though. That's another thing to think about, which I didn't think about, was the fact that yes, they're releasing this now. COVID's only been around for the last 4 months, 5 months, really seriously. So they've not had the year or two that it takes to develop a game. You're right. So they've basically just made the quickest game they can and just slapped the thing onto it.
And again, like that's above and beyond just being bad taste. This can't be a good game, and it's probably not going to be super relevant to people or desirable to people to play once it finally gets to them. But I've seen them fund. Like, I mean, that's the other thing. Like, I've seen people put it out there into the world, and I've seen that people have bought into it. So, I mean, there's a level at which what the market bears, the market will bear. That doesn't make things right. That just means that if that's a way that somebody chose to make money, that's a way that somebody chose to make money. I don't have to like it.
Yep. Yeah, I'm right with you with that one. What are you working on right now?
So right now we're finishing up Beards and Beyond. There's a couple of pieces from that. We're doing an adventure, and we're doing a genre focus on it. So we're creating a steampunk 8-page expansion for Beards and Beyond, which is a beard-based role-playing game. So far as I know, it's the only beard-based role-playing game. So that's our last Kickstarter. Finishing that off, getting that out to backers the next month. But we're bringing BrandStanding back. BrandStanding was our first Kickstarter offering. The game's done. It's phenomenal. It's a blast to play. When we created it, there wasn't anything of a similar theme really out there on the market since. And there's been a couple other things that have popped up, but the game is actually still very distinct. And the story of the game actually matches the experience of the game.
Before we had some technical difficulties there, and we had to redo the question. But what do you think was the issue the first time you launched? So when the first time you launched and you didn't do as well as you'd hoped, what was it that you didn't think you did right, and what did you change with the one that's coming out?
I think a big part was we hadn't built two things. We hadn't built the community that we needed to, not just around our game. We had done a good amount of community building around that, around within the games community, for people to know, like, these aren't just guys who are jumping in with another Cards Against Humanity clone, because it's not. Even though a lot of the deck design, because it's very minimalist, it's 2-color, has kind of that look to it. So a lot of it was getting into the community, getting connected, letting people know that you're serious about this. We hadn't built up a reputation as being able to run and fulfill a Kickstarter, and we were asking for a high amount. And the number one piece of feedback I got that was really critical by other people who I trust their impression of whether Kickstarter is going to work was, we did a good job of explaining the game, but we didn't do a good job of helping people understand how much fun it was to play. Which, when you have a party game appearance to a game, you essentially have to have from the get-go. You have to be selling how much fun the game is. And so it's really funny. We've actually had a ton of people on a business side like express interest in this. There are people who run incubators, who do business coaching, run business schools, who are like, we need this game to exist because this would be a great learning tool. And then they'll get it in their hands and they'll be like, hey, but we also just want to go to the bar and play this. Like, it's not just that it's a great tool for learning, because we've sent them like out some preview copies to some of those schools. like we play this all the time outside of that. Like I take it home, I play it with my family, and it's really been great to see kind of having those different avenues for it. So we built a lot of really great partnerships over the last little bit. We've built up that reputation, and I think when we go back, our funding goal will be about half of what it was the previous time, just to be able to get out the word about it. But it was a great experiment, and we tried some new different things with it that we knew were risks, and even as is in the way we were marketing and audience building, but were such a great way to explore the platform of Kickstarter. And in my experience, if you're not taking some kind of risk in your campaign, there's nothing to make it stand out from anything else. So even though that campaign wasn't successful, there's some of the same risks that we'll be taking the next time around because we want our campaign to stand out, to look a little bit different. We're going to be taking all that feedback that we've gotten, reputation we've built for being able to do a Kickstarter, and take that into the next one that we launch.
Yeah.
A lot of our team members learned that like people, they thought that Kickstarter just automatically generated money for you. And I just consistently explain to them, like, yeah, I mean, there are people on there just looking for new things. You don't know that their thing is what you're looking for. There's not as many of those people as you think. Like, you've got to build the audience. They didn't really get that. The other thing it taught me, and this can sound a little bit cynical, talk is cheap. And everybody knows, like, your mom's going to say she loves your game. Wife will probably say she loves your game, you know, or your partner will probably say they love your game. Your friends will probably say they love your game, and they may be telling you the truth. They may really love your game. They already have an attachment to you, and you are the one explaining it to them. So that blind playtesting feedback, but also, like, everybody says they're going to back your game. They probably really want to and really intend to. Whether or not they show up on your Kickstarter and actually back it is the question. And it's not an indictment against anybody. It's not that anyone's bad because of it. But we had a lot of even big partners with big lists who said they wanted to push the game out, and then when you launch the game, it was crickets. And so, which is fine. Like, that's a thing that happens. And so with any of my friends where they're like, oh man, we've got, 100 people, 500 people, 1,000 people following our game, just reminding them, especially if it's their first time, yeah, and maybe 20% of them show up and back it, like, and that's good. Like, that's a good number, and that's good to have those numbers be high, but you're always talking about a smaller percentage actually coming through and following through on the commitment to back it. And that extends into real life, not just people who have clicked follow me, tab on Kickstarter.
What would be one piece of advice that you would give to a new designer coming into this with an idea that wants to make a game? What would you tell them to help them on their way?
And you've got some of the classics, like have fun with it. Like if you're not enjoying the process, like, and stop. Like, just let your love for games is more important than getting a particular game out there. I think the biggest thing is actually blind play testing. Like, if you haven't sent game to people who you have not explained how to play it to, who also don't understand how to play test things, and have given you blind, unsolicited feedback, you probably haven't gotten fully honest feedback and input into your game. And you don't know what a lot of the misses or breaking points might be in your rule set. So, first and foremost, I would say, like, don't let making a game ruin your love of games. Second of all would be, blind playtesting is so important, is so key to getting feedback. When we created Beards and Beyond, the beta version, the 4-page version that I launched a couple of years ago, we just set it up as a free downloadable. We pumped a couple dollars into advertising, and we built an email list of about 2,000 people, which is awesome for a free game that we just gave away. And it was a very rough game. I knew there were problems with it. I intentionally jammed it out in a week. I knew that there were things that were going to be broken or not work as smoothly, or that weren't going to be clear in the rules, even though I knew they were clear. And the feedback we got when we asked for the feedback from those 2,000 people, even though, again, it was this very small percentage that gave us feedback. We maybe got 100 pieces of feedback from however many people out of those 2,000 actually played the game. That feedback was the most helpful feedback I got, because they didn't know me. I had not explained the game to them. All they did was download a 4-page how to play this, rules light RPG, and then they gave me feedback on what they would like to see. And some of that feedback was unusable. Other parts of it was incredibly helpful. But the most important pieces that I got absolutely came from people I had never met, who actually tried and played the game for the first time and had real questions about, hey, could I do this? What about this? How would this work? Those questions that they asked or those critiques that they had me a whole lot more about the game and the hundreds of playtests I had done with people I knew.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to me today, Tony. This has been brilliant. You've been an excellent interviewee. Is that the word? Is that the word?
You've been an excellent interviewer, which we do know is the word. And it's
Great.
been a blast to be on here.
Thanks, Tony.